I'm Ron Bahar, and this is the story behind my story.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Blind, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Ron Bahar.
Thank you for listening to Author Stories. We are now more than 350 episodes in and not slowing down anytime soon. It's because of you, the loyal listeners who tune in each day to Author Stories to hear the best author interviews around, and I just wanted to say thank you. On the right-hand sidebar of the website at hankgarner.com, you can find links where you can subscribe to the show, and it helps other people find the show. The more people subscribe, the higher we go in the rankings, and the easier people find us. I'd like to thank some sponsors this week for helping us bring the show to you. I, your humble host, have a brand new book out. It's called the Pandora Codex. Oliver Weber, Book 1, A Closely Guarded Secret, a Stolen Artifact, and a Madman Trying to Open a Portal to Hell. Can Oliver Weber become the hero he's meant to be? Pick up the Pandora Codex now. It's the first book in the Oliver Weber series. The second book, Jacob's Ladder, comes out very soon. Go ahead, dig into this series. Grab it now. You won't be disappointed. My friend Patricia Gilliam has a new series called Series Craft 101, and she has a series of books, the Fictional Character Creator Workbook, Setting and World Building Workbook. If you are looking to put together a long-running series like Patricia has done, these are some things that she's learned and that she can help you to get on top of that makes managing a long series much easier. Go check it out. There's a link in the show notes, and we'll be talking about it more. Bokera Brumley has a new book called Imani Earns Her Cape. It's a middle grade novel. You might have heard us talk about it on the show just a week or so ago when Bokera was on. 12-year-old Imani should be celebrating the most important day of her life by eating myrfruit, casting flying spells, and laughing with her mother, but there's just one massive problem. Her mother's been kidnapped by a giant troll, and now Imani is lost in the Fey realm with no way home back to Virginia. Completing her rite of passage alone is inadvisable, but if Imani doesn't want to lose the only family she's ever had, she may have no choice. Transportal train travel, underwater cities, submarines, sea dragons, and unexpected family all combine in Imani Earns Her Cape. Thanks for listening to the show. At the end, as always, we have an audiobook clip from my friend Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Ron Bahar on the show with me. He has a brand new book out now called The Frontman. And let me tell you, if you are of the generation that I am, this book will hit so many notes for you. I've had such a great time reading this book, and I'm really excited to talk to you today. Ron, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm excited about this.
Ron, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Okay, this is going to be an unusual answer for you on an author's podcast, but I promise I had absolutely no intention of writing a novel until I was almost 49 years old, meaning about 3 years ago. I'm 52. So I was literally on the treadmill one morning with the TV on, and I don't know if I was watching some syrupy commercial featuring an old girlfriend, an old car, and some classic rock playing in the background. And I happened to think about my youth and thought, if I ever thought about writing a novel, I think I could write about what I know, meaning write about medicine and write about being a first-generation American and a minority. And maybe I could combine it with something about which I really don't know a lot about but love, and that's music. So there you have it.
Well,
I know that you weren't expecting to hear that.
Well, no, and that is a perfectly legitimate answer to the question. Storytelling doesn't have to come to us all, at the same time or in the same way. That's, I think if it's ingrained in you, it's there, and when the appropriate time comes, it'll manifest itself. I think that's an awesome answer. I love it. So when you were a kid, were you a bookish kid at all? Did you like reading?
Okay, I liked books growing up,
Yeah.
but I was absolutely not a voracious reader, and I never really read much outside of assigned reading as a kid. I know that's a little embarrassing again to say on an author's podcast, but I think you want the truth there.
Yeah.
I was actually really single-minded about becoming a physician from a very early age, meaning from age 6, I think. And I literally focused on nothing else until I became one. And so I read very little for pleasure all the way through med school. Since that time, I had written some scientific articles and on some really esoteric subjects, and I had written some speeches for my son's bar mitzvahs, and that was really about it. So, whereas I really enjoyed reading, I probably read some things that most of your authors would not read, some nonfiction, like Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond, but fiction too. But growing up, really, I was single-minded about becoming a physician and a pretend scientist, which I hopefully am now. And so that's what I did. That's what I did. I had readers to me like my grandmother who wrote some poetry, and I talk about it a bit in the book, which is semi-autobiographical.
What?
No.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But really, as far as authors inspiring me at a very young age to write a novel, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
I love it. What specialty or flavor of medicine did you go into?
I'm a pediatric gastroenterologist, so I finished med school, and then I finished pediatric residency out at UCLA, and then a gastroenterology fellowship in pediatrics, and then I worked there as an attending for a few years, and I've been in private practice in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles for about 17 years.
Nice. You say that the book The Frontman, and the name of the book is The Frontman, and it is on sale now for those of you listening. You say that it is it's a fictionalized version of an autobiography. I understand that feeling when you're on the treadmill and these kind of nostalgic feelings. Maybe that's what it is. Start kind of washing over you, and we come to this point where we want to share our story, and before these memories are lost, or maybe it's we want to reconnect with something, some early passion. First off, how did you decide to start writing the story? And if it is sort of based on you, how did you come to terms with what would be true and what would be fictionalized?
Oh,
and
okay,
I'm famous for asking 18 questions at once, so pardon me.
No, that's okay. Okay, and if I forget to answer part of the question, then I apologize.
No,
you can yell at me for that.
No.
But so I really thought that I had something interesting to talk about, but my life really and my story was not that salacious. And I thought if I write a true autobiography, I think I'll probably put some people to sleep. I do think that having an unusual background in that I'm a child of Israeli immigrants. Actually, my mom was born and raised in Israel. My dad was born in India, and he moved to Israel when he was a teenager. And they both came here when my dad was in graduate school. So I had an unusual upbringing that I grew up in Nebraska. I was born in Colorado, grew up in Nebraska, but we were the only Israeli family in town. So pretty much if you lived in the Midwest in the 70s or 80s and you were Israeli, chances were that one of your parents was a professor. And then in those days, it was probably your dad. So I had an interesting background, I think, in that I felt like an outsider much of the time, and to the outside observer, it just wouldn't seem that obvious because I kind of looked like everybody else, and I spoke English without an accent. But I really felt quite different growing up, not just Jewish as a minority, but Israeli. And so I thought, well, I need to make the story a little more salacious. So I made it into a sex, drugs, and rock and roll story. And the fictionalized me is far more interesting, hopefully, to readers than the real me.
Well, everyone can't write, the heroin diaries or something. You got to work with what you got.
Exactly. I got a little flack about the way I wrote it, meaning I have some friends and relatives who are writers, and not only did I make it semi-autobiographical, but a lot of the names are real, and this part of their stories are real, and part of their stories have changed. And, I asked permission from every one of them. I said, do you mind if I talk about you, whether or not it's true or fictional? And there's a disclaimer and an author's note. And I had some really gracious friends who said, absolutely, I don't care what you write. I have a former teacher who was so excited about it, and I wrote some crazy things about him. And then I had some friends who were like, I don't think so. I really don't. Not for me. I don't want anyone to think that this happened to me, especially after they read the book.
So in those cases, did
Yeah.
you change the names or did you change the content?
I mostly changed the content. Some of the names have changed, and actually, my real prom date had absolutely nothing to do with the story. Sadly, when you read the book, I have had so many people ask me, I'm like, was that really your prom date? Was that really the love of your life? So, sadly, no. But, well, I am happily married, but sadly, no in that regard. But I actually got in touch through Facebook with my prom date and had her read the book, and she really got a good laugh out of it. And she said, I never knew you were so insecure or had this kind of story in you. And I said, well, I'm 52. I got a day job. I can write about whatever I want. And if the story's too crazy for people to read, well, then so be it. But hopefully people will find it interesting. But she definitely got a hoot out of it.
Well, the story really revolves around the two loves, love of music and the love of medicine. Was that real for you? Did you really consider, should you go music or medicine?
No. So there's one of the main characters in the book is Benjamin Kushner, who is one of my real life best friends, and he happens to be an incredibly talented musician, guitarist, and singer. And I was always jealous of his musical skills, and still am. And he knows it, and he thinks it's funny because I have a day job, and I think I do a pretty good job at it. But I've always been jealous of that, and I do love music, so that's real. But my skills are not. I was listening, or I was thinking about what you were just mentioning about memories and nostalgia. And so one of the things that I found out, because I've always kind of been obsessed with music from my youth, and it turns out that that's a real thing. There's something called a reminiscence bump in our adolescent brains, a reminiscence bump, that allows us to indelibly etch in our minds these autobiographical memories better than any time in our lives. And these memories that's enhanced by auditory cues like music that we listened to in our youth. And that's why I memorized every word of certain albums from the 1980s, like Argy Bargy by Squeeze and Murmur by R.E.M., but I absolutely cannot memorize any lyrics from, I really struggle with Kanye and Kendrick Lamar, and my kids laugh at me, but that's the way it is.
Well, we're going to dissect some of those differences between then and now in a little bit. But I love that the opening to every chapter, you begin with a lyric and then you talk about the artist and how that song charted. Were you an obsessive music fan in the time? I know you talked about that. I wore out probably 3 CDs of Murmur, I think. And, so yeah, I totally get that. But were you that kid that, was an obsessive music collector?
I didn't have a large volume, but the albums, I listened to over and over and over. And I actually met my wife, when I was 18 still. And so she knows how I could wear out, these handful of albums. I English Beat, Special Beat Service was played over and over and over again in my dorm room, and I just tortured her with it. And something I should mention too, I really tortured my whole family in writing this book and trying to figure out which song to use for which chapter. And I'd say, come up here, and it was like Battle of the Bands. I'd make them listen, what do you think about, using Rolling Stones here or modern English here, and they would just give up and say, it's whatever you want. And I ended up learning. I wasn't such an audiophile then as far as my knowledge of music. I have learned so much about 80s music over the course of the last couple of years in writing this book, just by reading online on Wikipedia, and there's another site called Song Facts, and then just looking up the band's websites. I really learned a ton. There's so much information out there that just wasn't available so easily when we were kids, but I kind of enjoyed myself in doing it.
I love that you brought out that little factoid about the reminiscent bump. Is that what you called it?
Yes. Reminiscent bump. Yeah.
Because music has, and I love that there's actually science to back that up, because I think we all can hear a song and we're immediately transported back to, we get that feeling again. It's almost like we're back in the scene. The only other thing I know of that has that same power is smell. And I tell my kids all the time that my grandfather, who one of the people that I loved most dearly on the earth, he would chew tobacco, and I could walk in somewhere and there's a piece of a smell somewhere, and I'm instantly transformed back to 9 years old with my granddad. But music has that same power to put you right back in the spot. As you started collecting music and music facts and kind of going back through your adolescence, did some of this music become powerful like that to you, to trigger those memories and to help you to relive it?
Oh my God, yeah. So I wrote the outline for the book at the very beginning. I pretty much stuck to it, I gotta say. And I knew kind of what I wanted to talk about in each chapter, but truly, before I started every chapter, I started with the song to sort of set the tone in my mind about how I wanted to write it. It was incredibly helpful. And not only that, but I had a lot of people read the book because, I'm a debut author, and you saw I wasn't a voracious reader in my youth, so I really needed people to edit this for me. I'd never gone through this kind of editing process before, so I had quite a few people read it, and that's the thing that people pointed out most, that they really enjoyed having the music at the beginning of each chapter as kind of a segue to what was going to happen next. And not only did most people feel that it really it dovetailed into the story, but they also said, I can't even tell you how many times, oh my God, I just remember that song and it reminded me of this event in my life. So hopefully it was fun, not just for me, but for readers as well. The
Ron in the book has a witty sense of humor. in that very self-deprecating. And I think a lot of kids that feel like outsiders tend to default to humor, and especially self-deprecating humor. If you can beat someone to the punch, or if you can, there's just something endearing about that. Was that something important to you, especially being a first-generation American son of immigrants? And I can only imagine always trying to find your place where you fit in, especially in a state of corn, things like that.
Yeah.
Was humor important to you, and how important was it in the writing to hit those notes?
I think it was incredibly important for me to grow up with humor and try to write about humor, because I think that that helped me through the day. Again, to most outside observers, it just didn't seem that anything was necessarily that difficult. And I have, again, my old prom date said, I didn't know you were that insecure. Like, yeah, I actually was. So, and I was also really, really shy around girls. And so I was definitely the funny guy to most of them, and certainly not the boyfriend to any of them. So I did my best with humor. I was MC at our senior talent show with some of my friends. So I tried to I wasn't necessarily that funny, but I tried to use humor in my everyday life to get me through the day, in other words.
Yeah, for sure. I hope you take this the way I intend it. But when I was reading this book, I got, I think I remember telling my wife, it's like, this book reminds me of a John Hughes movie. And I was getting that same kind of feeling. And I actually went and bought a box set of movies and showed my kids, like The Breakfast Club and 16 Candles, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And it very much is in that vein to me. So kudos on that for, to me, it reads like a timeless classic that you could pick up 20 years from now and would still hit those same notes and give that same feeling.
That's really that. Go ahead.
No. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, first of all, that's really flattering. And secondly, because I'm not a professional writer, I sort of, in my mind, when I wrote the outline, I thought, I got to write this as though it's something like a John Hughes movie. And so the fact that you just mentioned that makes me feel really good, and I've accomplished something, at least to one person. I've actually heard that before, and it makes me really happy, so I appreciate your words. Oh,
absolutely. I think I was about halfway through it, and I told my wife, I was like, man, this makes me, well, first, I'm a little bit younger than you, about 5 years younger than you, I think. And so a lot of these experiences I completely, can connect with, and the music, absolutely. And, it took me back. And I think as an author, that's exactly what you want the reader to do. You want them to be transported, either, to a fantasy world that's completely made up, or maybe a version of our past that kind of becomes fantasy. So I love that you do that.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I was that kid in every John Hughes movie. Everyone either made fun of or thought of in a different way.
Right. Exactly. I was probably Cameron, but wished I was Ferris, and, probably,
Oh, I was much more Cameron than Ferris, I promise you.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Without the fancy car.
Exactly. Yeah. We didn't get to live in the museum, but I had all of the psychosomatic, stuff. When you mentioned just a minute ago that because you were not a professional writer, you just kind of did it the way that you wanted to. And I love writers who just completely break the rules, and because we've read so many formulaic books, and they keep coming out because they're formulaic. But when you sat down to write it, because you had never written a novel, had never taken classes, had never probably gone to a writer's workshop, and you didn't know all of the rules to break. How did you get started? You said you wrote down an outline and you started with music. Did you pick a particular time that you wanted to focus on? Kind of walk us through your process of how you got started.
Well, the biggest question I had, I knew, what I wanted to write about, but I didn't know in which time period I should write. And this, so I raised this idea to my two sons. My sons now are 20 and 17. And I also talked to my wife about this, like, which time frame should I talk about? Should I try and make it current? Or should I try and make it, so that it's really around the time where I was, coming of age when I was 17, 18 years old. And all three of them immediately said, absolutely do not try and write as though you're a teenager today, because you will fail miserably. Even though I'm a pediatrician, they said you will fail miserably because you don't see, specifically, they said you don't see social media the way that we do. And I think that was really good advice.
And you mentioned that in the back of the book. In your acknowledgments, you mentioned that conversation with your sons, and I laughed out loud, because I get that. We have 5 kids, and, I would be berated in the same way.
So it made most sense for me to do it that way. And then I just, I wrote an outline, spent a little time with it. And as I said, I pretty much stuck to it. The rest of it really was, writing it was, definitely a challenge to me, but what the subject matter was not. And so after each chapter, I said I had some reviewers, some lay people, actually some writers. My brother-in-law, Josh Reams, is a television writer. One of the characters in the book, Mark Gross, who's the class clown, is also a television writer for CBS. And I was lucky enough also to have Ed Decter look at it and read through the chapters, and he's a screenwriter for Something About Mary. So they were very, very helpful. And then after the whole manuscript was written, Nicola Krauss, who wrote the Nanny Diaries, helped edit it before we submitted it to publishers, and so they were very helpful to this novice. Really, really helpful. I definitely could not have done it without them.
It sounds like that you had some conversations with your family before starting the book. You talked about asking your wife and your kids, should it be present time or should it be when you were a teenager? What was your family's response when you started floating the idea that Dad is going to write this book?
I think for my son, sheer embarrassment. For my wife, and this is a little funny, but she was a little worried about the time it was going to take me, because she knows I'm a slow, kind of a plodding writer, and so my kids were just worried about how I was going to sort of expose myself. And I write things that are really embarrassing in the book, some of which are absolutely true. But my wife was also, again, worried about how much time was it going to take me to write. And she was right. It took me a lot of time. I spent a lot of time writing the manuscript. And so she warned me recently, and I had no idea, by the way, how much, even once, publisher wants to make it into a reality, and I didn't realize how much time I would have to spend with the publicist and writing pieces subsequently, and doing fun stuff like doing a podcast. How great is this? But it's all very time consuming. And so she warned me the other day. She said, I'm just warning you, if you want to write another book, if you don't either significantly cut down on your hours at work or quit your day job, I'm either going to start dating other men or just divorce you.
Yeah, it happens.
I've been duly warned. So yeah, I would do it again in a second, but man, is it daunting for anyone else out there who has a day job but really wants to write a book. I'm just warning you, be careful what you're in for. Wow, it's a lot of work.
It's a real commitment, isn't it? You have to be in it for the long haul. Yeah. So are you contemplating writing a follow-up?
I've been asked about it. We'll see how the book does and how it's received. I talked to my publicist about it, and she said you can't really see it as like how many books will I sell the first time, because you grow a following over several books. And I'm like, oh my God, it just sounds so exhausting. But I know that that's really how it works. She says it's rare that that a first-time author is going to write a huge hit and sell 1 million books. And I said, I understand that. I am realistic about it. She said, I just want you to keep that in mind. But I do think now that I've written a novel, I think I could talk about a few more things, not necessarily autobiographical, but I've been around the block a few times, and now I know at least how to write a book. I think I have a few things I could say. We'll see.
Well, I think the market is primed for this kind of book right now, especially in a couple. Well, when this airs, Ready Player One, the movie will be out in theaters, and I know the book is already back on the New York Times bestseller list in anticipation of the movie, and that book and subsequent movie is one 80s reference after another. I mean, it's 80s music and video games and it's just
right.
I'm
excited about it.
Yeah, it's a love story to our childhood. We've got this great mass of people that are our age now and are looking back with fondness on this time. And I really think that this book, The Frontman, is going to really resonate with a lot of people. Are you getting any early feedback from readers on it?
Specifically with regard to Ready Player One?
No, on The Frontman, on your book.
Oh, yeah. I do think it does resonate. I mean, I was thinking about things like, I was beaten to the punch by very, very famous people like Aziz Ansari with Master of One and Kumail Nanjiani with The Big Sick. Those are modern stories. But I really feel that the theme of otherness, I think, is really important now, and a lot of people have brought that up to me after reading the book. So I really appreciate that, and hopefully it will be timely. It will prove to be timely.
Well, I think it's timely in the references and the setting, but that story of otherness is absolutely timeless, and I think it has the potential to resonate with a much wider audience, but folks like us, I think, are going to get an extra layer of goodness from it. So yeah, that's you can't go wrong with the Outcast story. There's John Hughes built a career on it, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the back of the book, you had a conversation with your sons about whether it should be present time or in your adolescence. And you make that great comment about that your sons were worried that you would not understand music in the context of a social media world. What do you think that means, and what do you think that means for music now?
It's interesting. I'll just give you an example. I'll bet in your head, for instance, which song is coming next on the albums that you love the most from your era. Sounds like you're a later 80s person than I am, but which song is coming next. And for instance, for one of these albums, like with Squeeze or REM, I'm listening to the song, and then I talk to my son Matthew about, this is coming next. You'll see. It's a great song because, if you hadn't heard it before, he's like, how on earth do you know which song is coming next? And it's just not the way that kids think. Like Matthew in particular, he's my 17-year-old, he will listen to songs for about 30 seconds and then just move on. Like 30 seconds max. It's like, here's the next song. I'm like, who does that? Why would you do that? Why you got to listen to the whole 4 minutes and 29 seconds or whatever it is? That's just not the way they think.
Right, there's going to be an anthemic bridge.
On, it's fast.
Yeah, if you're skipping after 30 seconds, there's going to be an anthemic bridge that you're going to miss out on.
Right, totally agree. And so it's not an album. It's not even a single. It's a segment of a single that they listen to, and it's just totally different in the way we think of music. It's really totally different, and I think a lot of it has to do with the segmental way that they see the world, because they're basically flipping through pages because they have just an overload of information that comes to them constantly. So I think that's with regard to social media what is so different. We did I think have more time to think about a group of, in this case, songs.
Yeah. It was more album oriented, and it was it seemed like, and this may just be two old guys reminiscing about a long gone time period, but I remember collecting LPs, and you would sit down and you would put the record on, and you'd have the great cover art, and you would read the liner notes and stuff like that, and you would listen to it from beginning to end. And it seems like the artist paid more attention to the sequencing of songs, and especially some great song cycle albums out there, like Stevie Wonder or maybe Marvin Gaye or any number, Dark Side of the Moon from Pink Floyd, that the whole album told a story. And it's sad that it makes you wonder if a book like The Frontman will come out 30 years from now with the same resonance, in that music is so segmented and so choppy. I guess it'll be interesting to see how pop culture changes and then influences art and literature, or if it's going to be something completely different. It'll be something to watch for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
So Ron, what was your favorite part of this book to write?
I think my favorite part of the book to write, well, certainly kind of matching the songs with the episode, but also there's a part in the book where I take a trip to Israel and visit my grandfather. And so my grandfather, meaning my mother's father, was very important to me, but I didn't spend nearly as much time as I wanted with him. And so this was sort of my way of having an enhanced relationship with him that I didn't have. And we talk about these are fictional conversations. We talk about, why he moved from, or how he got from Belarus to, what was, when he first got there, Palestine, and then Israel, and why it was so important to him. But that love superseded everything. And that, he, didn't like seeing people suffering. I thought that was really important for me to write. It was sort of cathartic. Also, in writing the chapter about my family history, I think it's the fourth chapter, was actually, pretty emotional for me too. When I first, by the way, you can imagine after having written this book, giving it to my mom to read was a little tough for a lot of different reasons. She's a little sensitive. And when she read it, I was worried that she was going to flip out and say, "You absolutely cannot publish this book." So I first showed it to her, and I gave her a lot of prefaces. I said, this is a work of fiction. There are autobiographical stories here, but this is a work of fiction. Just read it and tell me what you think. Remember, sometimes you may not be portrayed the way you really were and the sweet person that you are. I think you're sort of heroic in this book. That's kind of the way I see it. So she read it. She gets to chapter 4. She just starts bawling. And then she leaves the room and she comes back and she just said, it was real. It really got to me, and me too. This was my family's history, and that part was indeed autobiographical. So I was happy that she got something out of it too. She actually did enjoy it. She doesn't like the profanity. She said, she's like, I don't understand why you have to swear so much in the book. I said, I was 17. That's really what I did then. I swear a little now too. And my dad, who recently read it, said, I like it, but it's wicked. I don't know if wicked's the right word, but I certainly got a rise out of both of them. So I was proud of it. I was proud of that. If I got something out of them, then that made me happy.
Well, you obviously reconnected with your adolescent angst, if you were able to get that kind of a rise out of them. That's great. Oh, that's wonderful. That was I was going to ask you how your parents responded to it. That's perfect. But I love that you reconnected with your grandfather in a new way, and I think that's the power of story. What a fascinating turn of events there. Ron, the book is The Frontman. I am absolutely love the book. I'm going to send everybody to pick up a copy of it. If people are just finding out about you in the book, are you online anywhere where they can connect with you?
Yes. So through Twitter, it's at Ron John Bahar. Facebook is Ron Bahar Books. And I have a website, which is ronbahar.com.
Excellent. Ron, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show, and thank you for writing.
This was fun.
Thanks for writing such an exceptional book. I'm going to send everybody to pick up a copy of it.
I appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
No use crying over spilled milk. Eliza hated that cliché. She'd grown up a cliché, her life a bowl of cherries, duck soup, easy as pie, child's play behind a white picket fence. Mother had been the Wyatt Earp of clichés, firing them off quick draw. A rotten apple spoils the barrel. Smile and the world smiles with you. Every dog has his day. Children should be seen and not heard. She believed them all, particularly this last. Eliza obliged, preferring to wander the streets of Wytheville, Virginia, on her own lonesome terms. The divorce left Laura a spinster librarian, and one false step on icy stairs left her an invalid as well. The accident happened on New Year's Eve, 1950. Laura had just locked the doors of Wytheville Public Library. We must make black-eyed peas tomorrow, Laura had been thinking, with turnip greens. That ensured a lucky new year, and if you swept some money over your threshold, a prosperous one, too. She loved those old Southern traditions. She looked both ways, checking for Negroes, but turned to heel on the icy marble of the stairs and fell into the bushes below, breaking the long bones in both legs. Eliza had taken advantage of her mother's absence. She'd lost her virginity that same night. She'd swept Ron Partridge over her threshold, initiating her own beloved tradition. She was nursing a hangover, giddily reliving the event. But around 8:30 she realized that her mother had not come down to breakfast. She checked her mother's bedroom, found it empty, took the bus down to the library, climbed the high stairs, knocked hard on the library doors, and heard a groan below. Laura lay under the William Penn barberry bushes, below the yellow-trimmed windows of the non-fiction section. Her white stockings ran Jezebel red with blood. Sweat and melted snow had soaked her blouse, and her gray forehead blazed. The broken bones didn't kill Laura Merrick. She lay in the hospital, wheezing, her legs mortared up in casts. She had few visitors after the first week. Her church group was glad to fret over a poor thing for a day or two, but they trickled away when Laura had the bad manners to linger. On Valentine's Day, as her mother slept, Eliza drew big, sloppy hearts on her casts. Laura harumphed when she woke and insisted on keeping her legs hidden beneath blankets afterwards. But in late March, something miraculous happened. Laura's self-control dropped. She ranted at nurses, spit at doctors, swore like a Navy pilot dropping F-bombs on Hiroshima. She had dementia, the doctors said. Eliza decided that her mother had just stopped believing her own bullshit. The spells continued over the next 2 weeks, and Eliza enjoyed her mother's company for the first time. They swapped bawdy jokes, ogled the handsome interns, and chattered like best girlfriends late into the evening. They had long conversations, and Laura spoke her own mind in her own words about things that mattered to her. It broke Eliza's heart when the prim, condescending librarian returned. Laura hardly acknowledged anything that had passed between them. The clichés returned. You can't have your cake and eat it too. A leopard doesn't change its spots. Nothing is certain except death and taxes. This last proved true. On April 15th, Laura Merrick marked her Bible with a tongue depressor, set it on her nightstand, leaned back against the headboard, and coughed blood down the front of her nightdress. Eliza found her that way, dead as the proverbial doornail, and yes, the blood was thicker than water, just as her mother had always said. Much thicker than water, in fact, perhaps as thick as molasses in January.